This is the Old West Element 2 Part 1 about the American Dream on the Western Frontier. Now, when discussing the American Dream on the Western Frontier, the place you have to start is the pioneers, these people that you see in the picture right here. These were people, whether they be from New England, the Mid-Atlantic, or the South, who were searching for their American dream in the West in the early 1800s. Sooner than later, they would be joined by immigrants from Europe as well. In 1844, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that Europe stretches to the Appalachians, which was the mountain range in the east, but America lies beyond. The relentless energy of those seeking the American dream was fueled by youth. By 1850, 50% of the population was under the age of 30. However, life was difficult for most families who pioneered west. Poor food, clothing, and shelter, as you can see here in the picture, often led to disease, depression, and early death. Pioneer women especially were cut off from human contact for days or weeks at a time. The nearest neighbor could be miles away as they were sheltered in a dark cabin, in a secluded clearing, or an enormous field. Breakdowns and even madness were fairly frequent. Not that they didn't find ways to cope with those feelings at times. Pioneer women became very resilient and very strong, helping out with the chores and being as important to the homestead as their male counterparts had been. You had to be tough to live out there, no matter what gender you were. In geographic isolation, pioneers were fiercely individualistic, but also ill-informed and somewhat superstitious. However, they would soon reach out for help. As time continued on, pioneers were the leading drivers in shaping the Western landscape. Starting as far back as the eastern seaboard, pioneers had often exhausted land in the tobacco regions of Virginia and North Carolina, and then moved on, often to Kentucky. When sugarcane in Kentucky was burned off, European bluegrass thrived in the charred cane fields. This became ideal for livestock, so pioneers were vital in terms of forming the environmental landscape of that time and in that place in America. As far west as the plains leading to the Rocky Mountains, something called ecological imperialism was taking place. A rendezvous system, as it was called, existed there, where American trappers were all over in the Rockies. So each summer, traders would leave St. Louis, destined for the Rockies, set up camp and wait for the trappers and Indians to arrive there for their annual trapping so that they could trade goods with them. This also took place on the Pacific coast. All told, it almost wiped out the populations of the beaver, the buffalo, the otter, and other fur pelt animals. The traders would sell them means to do their job a little bit better and encourage them to come out there. So there was a lot of fur trapping going on, and it really damaged that aspect of the environment as well. However, Americans also revered America's natural beauty. In the eyes of Americans, it was unrivaled in the world, spiritual and inspiring. Not that everybody was always pleased. In 1832, George Catlin, who you see here, had observed Native Americans trading buffalo tongues for whiskey. Appalled at this, Catlin proposed that a national park system be established. A system that would later start with Yellowstone National Park in 1872. So, by 1870, how was the western frontier of the United States defined? Well, back in colonial days, for a stretch, the Appalachian Mountains had defined the western frontier. You know, when we became our own nation, if you went on the other side of these mountains, you were in frontier territory out here, away from civilization. At that point, the Mississippi River was considered to be the west coast, if you will. After 1803, when we picked up the Louisiana Purchase, though, something changed. By 1870, as we had gathered more and more territory, the Mississippi River was no longer the western part of the United States. The Mississippi River was now the defining border between east and west. East of the Mississippi River was the eastern U.S., and west of the Mississippi River was the western U.S., with St. Louis, Missouri as the gateway city. If you were going out there to live your American dream, St. Louis was where you went to get all your supplies and everything you needed and launch your new American dream. Which is why the Gateway Arch is in St. Louis, Missouri. In old Victorian homes and yards, you usually had an arch going into the home over the door, or an arch going over the gate that led into the yard. That's why, with St. Louis being known as the gateway city to the West, well, every gateway needs an arch, and therefore you have one, a really big one, in St. Louis, Missouri. But one final question that we want to bring up here is why some areas of the West were settled sooner than others. If you look on this map right here from the mid-1800s, California is already a state, while the rest of these, Utah, New Mexico, Minnesota, Oregon, are all territories. There's even an unorganized territory right in the middle that hadn't even been given a name yet. So why would California become a state before any of these other territories would? I mean, if you're going west, doesn't it just make sense to just settle as you go? Well, the reason was environmental, and this is where I get to play weatherman a little bit. If you've ever been to the Midwest, you'll notice that it's very barren and dry in the summertime, and it's got severe blizzards in the wintertime. I personally don't know why anybody chooses to go there. You have bad blizzards in the winter, and then you have Tornado Alley and a lot of tornadoes in the summer with soil that's very difficult to farm. If you want to live there, more power to you. But why did that happen? Why did people take these trails that you see on the slide here and completely bypass this region before the Civil War so that they could settle in California? Well, once again, the concept of rain shadow, an environmental concept, comes into play here. Rain, as it's coming off the Pacific coast, or I should say clouds as they're coming off the Pacific coast, gather water in them. When they hit this mountain range right here, the Sierra Nevadas, they start to climb. And as clouds start to climb, they start losing their moisture. That's why even today, this side of the Sierra Nevadas is lush and green and everything else. But you get over to this side of the Sierra Nevadas, and now you start seeing, you know, like If the Hills Had Eyes territory. It's an old creepy movie about people in a desert. I've been out here before, and once you land in Los Angeles and drive through this region right here and cross the Sierra Nevadas, it's pretty much all desert out here. I have relatives in Las Vegas as well, and I've been to a lot of different places here. The point is that the clouds have lost all their moisture, so there's no rain left for this region right here. Now, it will pick up some rainwater as it travels along, the clouds will, but then when they hit the Rocky Mountains, they climb again, and of course, what happens as they climb? They lose moisture, which is why you get lush vegetation in the Rockies and basically barren lands out here. On most maps of the time period prior to the 1880s, this whole region right here was not known as the Great Plains, it was known as the Great American Desert. And it was a place you went through to settle somewhere else, not a place where you would settle itself. That would change by the 1870s and on to the 1890s. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.